Gatesy, I have chills after watching that right now. And you might be asking, why did I have an old Sabres montage to start this show episode of the Crossing Swords podcast? Well, Lindy Ruff is back, and so is the Sabres identity. We got a lot to talk about today, Gatesy. First off, how are you doing? I'm excited to have you on.
I'm feeling good. It's a little warm in the summer right now, but nothing's making me more happy than talk about these Buffalo Sabres. How you feeling?
I'm doing great right now, man. We got to talk about this offseason. Obviously, a lot of heat on Kevyn Adams going into this summer. The pressure to make the playoffs, his job could be on the line if they miss it this offseason. Obviously, titled the show, Can the Sabres Make the Playoffs in 24-25? We'll talk about that in a bit. But first off, let's talk about the moves that have happened recently. A couple trades, a couple free agent signings. We'll go into each move in a second here. But what's your overall reactions to what we have seen during the past month, from the draft day trade for Beck Malenstein to Ryan McLeod for Matt Savoy, bringing in guys like Jason Zucker and so forth? What has been your overall reaction to what has gone down?
I think with each passing day, it's starting to make more and more sense on the whole envision of the Buffalo Sabres now and the future of the organization. I think a lot of us, myself included, were really gunning for this team to make a big splash, bring in a big top six winger to make some noise. But I think with each day, we're kind of seeing the team that, is going to be built around this Lindy Ruff style coaching style. I think we're going to talk a lot about this episode. And it's something that I think this team is finding its identity, like you talked about before, where it's not just going to be bringing in the guys with the most skill that, maybe have the biggest name and whatnot, because that hasn't worked for us in the past. And I think it's just really starting to build a team here. And it's just super, kind of still risky without bringing that big top six name. But I'm seeing the vision that Kevyn Adams has, and we're kind of going to see how it plays out the rest of the summer too.
Yeah, in the offseason, it starts out with the big move, bringing Lindy Ruff back. And I've said it a lot. I know fans are kind of divided on him being back. Some people think it's all about nostalgia. Other fans, they see his mixed results in New Jersey and Dallas, and they say, well, why are the Buffalo Sabres bringing him back to the picture? For me, it's about familiarity with Kevyn Adams. Lindy Ruff is the guy that brought Kevyn Adams into the league as an assistant coach. Adams learned under him. And right now, going into a prove-it season with his job on the line, I think Adams needed someone that he felt comfortable would run this team to the roster he sees fit for it. So for Lindy being back, nostalgia obviously is something that helps sell tickets and helps sell the hire to Terry Pegula. But there's more than just that. And what I wanted to see during late June, July, were what type of players were the Sabres going to build around? When you see Jeff Skinner get bought out, the first reaction by many is, wow, we're giving up a lot of goal scoring right there. What does this mean for the lineup? Then you see guys like Beck Malenstein get traded for with a second-round pick, and you're like, are we really going to go to these lower grinder type players? But when you bring in a Jason Zucker, Ryan McLeod, and Abe Kubel, and some of these additional guys, they're not going to be the splash moves, but you can clearly see, and Sam Lafferty also to that group, you can see that they are building a team based on speed, based on there's some grit there with a Malenstein who was one of the leading hitters on the Washington Capitals, 7th in the league in penalty kill minutes. Ryan McLeod, very good on the penalty kill with Washington. I think identity is something this organization really has probably lacked since the days of Lindy Ruff. Even when they had Eichel and Reinhart, there was no identity beyond them. There was no playing style. I think it's going to be fun to watch this team go forward, because that top six has to feel protected now that they have guys near the bottom of the lineup that can play a physical brand of hockey if needed, but they can just run and gun all game long with these guys.
Yeah, and I think that's something a lot of fans have been clamoring for years, for that grit to come back into the lineup. And now that it's here, we're seeing a lot of negativity toward that. But again, I think that just comes from that top six question mark. But again, I think it's something that we've all been kind of saying online this offseason is it's going to be a gamble for this organization on the top six returning to form with how they were. So that's kind of my whole thing with, buying out Jeff Skinner. It wasn't so much the on ice production, the contract, but, you know, you need these top guys to return to form somehow. And I think running back with the same group, either with Jason Zucker or Zach Benson, replacing Jeff Skinner in that top six is a gamble. But I think we're kind of both in agreement where we're going to see what Lindy Ruff is going to do with this team, bring that identity back to the Buffalo Sabres, and kind of throw some variety into what the offense even looks like. And hopefully that can get some more goals on the board compared to last season.
Yeah. So, and we're going to address this throughout the show, but have they done enough so far?
Yeah.
And that's going to be the question on everybody's mind. I think most fans, most people on the outside would say, no, they haven't. And I can completely get behind that reasoning. I don't know if I'm at the point where I could confidently say they've done enough. I think it's the unknown right now. Kevin Adams and Lindy are basically gambling that those top six guys return to form from what we saw 2 seasons ago, while the bottom of the team can kind of do the gritty stuff and things that we haven't really seen out of the team in recent years. But let's first start out with the projected lines. Just going to pull this up in a second. This is from Lance Lykowski of the Buffalo News. For his projected lines, I know you gotta go around it right there to get seen on camera. He has Peterka, Thompson, Tuck, Benson, Cousins, Quinn, Zucker, McLeod, Lafferty, then either Malenstein, Aube-Kubel with Krebs, Greenway, and you can see some of the extras right there as well. First off, what are your thoughts on his projected lineup, and would you make any changes to that?
Yeah, I really like having Benson in that top six. I think I put a tweet out a little bit ago putting him in there, and I think it's a good gamble for this team. I think Zach Benson surprised us from the get-go, where it's like, oh, he's had a really good development camp. Is he going to do it at training camp? He's had a really good preseason. Are they going to keep him? And then he makes the team. Are they going to keep him past 9 games? And he's kind of proven it with each step. So I don't think it's out of the ordinary to think he can make that jump from the third line to that second line and have some magic there. And I think the bottom six, I don't want to say is kind of plug and place at the moment, but I think you kind of have to really see who kind of gels early on, because a lot of that's going to be there. And I'm really excited to see Peyton Krebs under this Lindy Ruff system as well. He's a guy that's kind of gotten, I don't say the short end of the stick, but just hasn't found that level that I think a lot of us were hoping for in his game. And I think with Ruff and hopefully some better line mates this season too, where he can find that offense and really shore up his defensive side as well. But I think that lineup looks really good. And that fourth line is just speed, speed, speed. And I know that's something we've talked about for a while, is that fourth line is going to be quick. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I like how he has Peterka on the first line with Thompson and Tuck. Late in the season, Peterka really had some solid chemistry with those guys. And I think he is ready for a more elevated role than what we've seen. Obviously, he's had a lot of success with Cousins and Quinn. Didn't really get to see much of it last year because of Quinn being out. But Peterka has shown that he has a solid two-way game that really is deserving of top-line minutes with the Sabres team. Very intrigued about the possibility with Benson on the second line. Right now, at this point, it looks like it's going to be either Benson or Zucker with Cousins and Quinn. I think Quinn could be a 30-goal scorer this year. Maybe that's becoming like too popular to say, but I said it before last year that if he wasn't hurt, I thought he was going to score 25 last year, and Peterka ended up doing that. And that's part of the thing. Like, I hear people say stuff like, this top six, it's not good enough. Well, you got a former 40-goal scorer with Tage Thompson. You have a former 30-goal scorer with Alex Tuck. You have Peterka that had nearly 30 goals last year. You have Cousins that had 30-plus 2 years ago. You have Quinn that, like, let's be real, Quinn probably has the second best goal-scoring potential on this team.
Correct.
You have Benson, who that's unknown. He's young. He's 19, but he has the high-end skill to really be a solid point producer. And if that doesn't work out, you have Zucker, who, even though he wasn't really a high point producer last year and he's getting a little older, has a history of putting the puck in the net, several 20-goal scoring seasons. So there is talent there. The third line, I don't know if I feel the same way about Lafferty being on the third line with McLeod and Zucker. I personally would probably have Greenway up there instead of Lafferty. And then you look at the fourth line, Malenstein, Abe, Kubel. I would have Lafferty with them. I like those three guys. Krebs right now, he might be on the outside. Now, I am excited about what he could potentially bring to the table under Ruff, but he's going to have to prove it. He's going to have to earn his ice time, which is something that is probably a good thing for this team.
Good.
Because how many guys on the Sabres roster over the last 10 years have had to earn ice time? We talk about with the Bills, with Brandon Beane, how competition brings out the best in players because they need to prove it. I think this is going to bring out the best in this young Sabres team that now actually has some veterans. It's not just a bunch of kids. There's a bunch of guys now that you can look at and say they have playoff experience. They have experience playing in this league. Defensively, how do you have your D pairings overall?
Yeah. With the D pairings, I don't know. I think it's something for me that last year was just such a mess on the Sabres back end that it felt like each night there was something different going on the Sabres blue line, and they'd find success one game and then the next game would be completely unknown. So I'm really hoping that, this year they can find some solidarity there. I mean, Samuelson was hurt for a good chunk of the season. Him and Dahlin have been, really lukewarm for a lot of it. So I think my big insight is you have your big three, your Dahlin, your Power, and your Byram. Those three have to get going. So whatever other three guys you can plug and play there, with Yoki Haru being re-signed, Samuelson coming back healthy. And that's going to be huge for this team. Connor Clifton as well. It's just what combination of guys can you put together to find some sort of success on the back end? And thankfully last year, they didn't have to worry about too much with how well Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen played in net, where in years past, that defense would have gotten slaughtered with so many more goals going behind them. So as long as UPL continue to play how he did last year, they get some little bit stronger, backup goaltending as well. Defense shouldn't be as too big of a concern as long as, there's not red flags going everywhere with guys not feeling comfortable. But I think with Yoki Haru coming back, it's something that I think is another gamble what this team's doing, but kind of running it back. But I'm kind of interested to see how it all comes together. But what are your thoughts on what Kevin Adams is doing on the back end?
Yeah, so, and I just want to get to Steve Noble's comment first. Fans talk out of both sides of their mouth. Well, that's fairly obvious. Definitely Sabres fans, that's a common thing. They want trades, then the trades happen. They're not the trades that they ended up wanting. So you're in a no-win situation. But I get you, Steve, and we've talked before away from the show. It's one of those things where you're never going to satisfy everybody. And then he also commented here, if we trade for top six forward, we are going to overpay big time. That's absolutely the truth. As much as I still want a top six forward, I'm not going to lie.
One just showed up.
I do think a top six forward probably puts this team over the top for being a playoff team next year. Like you would leapfrog Washington and the New York Islanders, and then New Jersey probably gets another spot right there. But yeah, you're going to have to give up a lot. And then you have the questions going into the future. Well, if Quinn has a great year, if Peterka has a great year, you're going to have to give them solid money going forward. So there is a lot of questions. It's funny for a team that has had no winning. There's still a lot of salary issues going into the future. You have Jeff Skinner's contract on the books, but looking at the defense right now, I think the Sabres have, I'm going to pull up his card right now, a Henry Yoki Haru problem.
Yep.
And the reason being, and you look at Henry Yoki Haru, he has not been very good in recent years. Now, he's not awful. He's not horrendous. He's an okay NHL player.
Some good flashes as well. Points during the season.
He has flashes. But the issue that you have with him, and this has been well documented on several other podcasts covering the Sabres right now, so I don't want it to be coming across like this is my own original thought, but he plays really well with Dahlin, and then he struggles with basically everyone else.
Yeah.
But when he's a guy that you look at as one of your bottom two defensemen or maybe your fourth defenseman, having him play solid minutes with Dahlin it doesn't seem to be a good fit, a good match. Ideally, I would like to see Byram with Dahlin. I don't care that they're both the same hand, whatever. The versatility is a thing in sports now. You don't need to just do traditional left, right, and stick to things like that. I would like to see Power with Samuelson on the second pair, and then give me Clifton, Jokiharju with the third pair. Now, the scary thing about that is obviously Jokiharju struggles with everybody else, and then you're going to put him with Clifton. Who knows how bad that could be? Like, that could be scary bad, and that gives me nightmares at night. But is it something they're just going to have to suck up and deal with, knowing that you're going to have Dahlin on the ice for basically 22, 23, 24 minutes a night? You're going to have Owen Power on the ice for 20 minutes a night, and then just try to reduce it as much as possible for them. That's probably what I would do. But as others have said, it really might be the move might actually be more important to trade for another defenseman to take Jokiharju's spot more so than trade for a top six forward. If you look at what they need, because if you ask me, could Benson or Zucker get by on the second line? I would tell you, I think they probably could. Now, are the Sabres going to be able to get by with this Jokiharju problem? We'll see. Like, top end talent wise, they have top end talent. Like, Dahlin is a top 10 defenseman. Owen Power will probably be at some point in the near future a top 20 defenseman.
He's going to take a big step this year.
Yeah. Bowen Byram, in my opinion, is extremely talented. I never quite understood all the complaining about trading Middlestat for him, but he has a lot of ability. So I like this D group. I just don't know how Jokiharju is going to screw with all of this. But then also at bringing Lindy Ruff in, how is having a different coach behind the bench going to impact their play as well?
Yeah, just whether the pros of having Byram and Dahlin together and how, they can really excel each other's game is worth kind of the cons of a Clifton Jokiharju pairing. And if Dahlin and Byram really click together and you're finding a ton of success on offense and on defense, because Dahlin is one of the best defenders on this team. He's taken massive strides since he's come onto this team in 2018. I think his defense has been really underrated in recent years. If those two really click like they were when Byram first got here, I don't know how you just can't run with that and find some sort of way to get that third pairing to work. Whether Jacob Bryson makes an appearance, because I thought he was serviceable last year. He took a big jump from where he was the year prior. He was public enemy number one going into last offseason. He came in when the team needed him, and you didn't hear his name a lot, which is a really good thing. He did his job, and he's probably going to have to play again this year. The Sabres were really banking on no one getting hurt for most of the season. That trade from McLeod really helped for that, because you're going to pull up a kid right away if someone does go down. So the same thing on the back end. It's got to stay healthy, and that's kind of been a big hurting point for this D-core in recent years with Samuelson and whatnot.
Yeah, injury is always going to be an issue. Yeah. Some good news, you bring in a guy like Dennis Gilbert. You still have Bryson back. You have Ryan Johnson in the AHL.
Yep.
Some development going on over there. So it does feel like defensively they have much more depth, which should be beneficial to them going forward. Now, forward-wise, they don't really have that depth. They're gonna have to pray that they remain healthy, because we saw last year, Tate's playing hurt, Quinn being out of the lineup, Tuck with some things throughout the year. It kind of destroyed them offensively, and they weren't able to recover. They're kind of doubling down on that this year. So let's hope nothing bad happens between now and later in the season. And goaltending wise, I think you and me are on the same page right now. UPL is the man, but there is some interest right now. There is an interesting conversation to be had with when you bring in James Reiner on a $1 million deal. Is Levi guaranteed that 2 spot, or is Reimer your backup goalie entering this year? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's something where if it's another situation where UPL is going to be given the full frontal of the games, which I don't think they're going to do. And in my head, what I envision is some sort of 60-40 split UPL Levi, where Levi takes a big step after playing a lot of games in Rochester. And, last year he was given the keys right off the get-go, which I didn't agree with at the time, and it backfired horribly for the team. So I think, it's UPL's net, but it's not anywhere close to the amount of games he was playing last year, because it was really him, or you're going to hope and pray that, the team can score that night with him not in the net. So I'm hoping Levi comes in, takes that 2 spot. He looks good in camp. And it's a situation where we have the 1A, 1B of the future, where these guys just kind of run for a while. And we find a lot of success, and Reimer's just in. If an injury were to happen, we're not pulling up, a guy with no NHL experience, because that killed the Sabres last year, where you're only relying on one goaltender to make saves every single night, and UPL is getting worked like crazy. And it worked out for the Sabres, but that you can't guarantee and plan for that every single season, where one of these guys is going to catch fire and you can run with that forever. But yeah, I think a fun thing too with the top six is if a guy does go down there, where the way this team's built, I wouldn't be the craziest thing in the world where, last year where Rosane and Kulik got called up and they were buried on the fourth line, they might see some top six opportunities where they can actually show their game off, show some skill, even maybe get some power play time crazy. Because Kulik, he's got that Olofsson one-timer in his back pocket where, if an injury does happen, it's not going to be, Kyle Okposo being on the first line this year. It could be a young gun hopping in and your bottom six stays exactly where it's at. And that's kind of exciting for me, at least, in, thinking about a bad situation. But what are your kind of thoughts on all that too?
So I actually like that point right there, because a lot of fans want to see what a Kulik can do, what a Roseanne can do in the future, what an Anton Wahlberg can do. So now you're not really creating barriers from them eventually getting opportunities. Even with the 1-year contracts of the fourth line, like, there's going to be opportunities for these guys eventually. And with injuries, you're going to see them in Buffalo, which is exciting. And maybe this is actually more of Kevin Adams vouching for his prospect system than it is anything else. He's saying, well, I think Benson is our second line guy. And if something does happen to one of these guys, we have the guys in Rochester that we can depend on. So that's a really good point. A couple comments here. RJ mentioning, I love the speed we're getting in McLeod. Hell, I am too. When you get a guy in the 100th percentile in speed, that's pretty nice. There's only a few guys in the NHL faster than McLeod and one of his former teammates that we all know, Connor McDavid. And then Steve adding to the goalie conversation right here, saying, I think Levi starts in Rochester. We're blessed that it's only a 90-minute drive. I'm terrified they keep 3 goalies on the roster. Steve, I don't think they're going to do the 3 goalie thing again. I think they learned their lesson. If they did, I'd be extremely disappointed with Lindy and Kevin Adams. One of them will be the starting goalie in Rochester. At this point, I still think Levi is the Sabres' backup based on what he did last year at the end in Rochester. He had a .927 save percentage. I think he is ready for the next step. As you mentioned, Gatesy, I believe Reimer is more insurance of, let's have Levi win the job. Let's not just give him the job. And if Levi wins that competition, he should be ready for, like I said, like you said, a 60-40 split, something like that. Now, if Levi's not ready, you have the realization that at least you have someone solid that has been a good backup goalie for a long time in the NHL. I would feel comfortable with Reimer or Levi being the backup, obviously pulling for Levi because I think he is part of the long-term future.
I think that Reimer move too adds competition, like we talked about earlier, to every single part of this lineup now, whether it's, that second line left wing between Benson and Zucker and all the plethora of defensemen, the, 4 or 5 fourth liners that are currently kind of floating around, who's going to be the odd man out, to even your backup goaltender. I think when we hear so much about players that have left and the lack of urgency, competition, kind of will in the Sabres locker room at times, having this competition from the get-go all through summer, through training camp during the season, I think it's a really small detail that might go unnoticed. And kind of this new Lindy Ruff regime where, just because you were where you were last year doesn't mean you're going to have that same spot this year. And this team needs to win, and they're going to put the players in who can help them win right now. And I think that's a big thing for this organization moving forward too.
Yeah, that's a huge thing, because when you think of everything with the Sabres team, like they need to take that next step, and things can't just be taken for granted anymore. You're going to have to earn spots. You're going to have to get your players to elevate their game. And when you're talking about a bunch of young players, eventually it has to happen, or you got to move on from them. So we've talked about identity. This is going to be a team that's going to be fast. They're going to try to go up and down the ice, but they also have a little bit of grit on that fourth line. Maybe a little bit more of a net foot front presence with a Zucker, a little bit more of a forechecking ability, where it's not just going to be them having to do things one way, and if you stop it, they're out of answers. Because let's be real, that's what the Sabres have been the last 2 years. They either score on the rush or they have no ability to put the puck in the net at all. And defensively, they've had liability. So we talked about identity. They're going to be fast. They're going to be fun. They're going to be a little bit grittier. We talked about projected lines, how we think it's going to look. Now we got to get to the big question. Have they done enough to become a playoff team this upcoming season? And before we get to that answer, we're going to, I guess, explore what we think these moves meant for how they're going to get to that point. And I'm going to, first off, bring up Ryan McLeod here. Ryan McLeod is not a point getter. He is not a highly touted offensive guy, but you see the projected WAR at 70%. A lot of people loved the move when they brought him in for Matt Savoy. Obviously, a lot of fans, they hate giving up a talented prospect like Savoy because who knows what he's going to do. But the Sabres have a plethora of similar players in their system. But one of the underlying things that really, I don't know, a lot of people on the surface have been paying attention about McLeod and some of these other guys. The Sabres sucked at puck retrieval and clearing their zone defensively last year. That's something that Ryan McLeod is very good at. And Lindy Ruff, asked at a fan event earlier this year, was saying that the Sabres need to find more ways of putting pucks in the back of the net, that they can't just rely on one way. And he said 2 years ago, one of the best scoring teams in the NHL. They had 296 goals, third in the league. And he said, in the NHL, teams adjust to what you do. They find answers, they counter, and what you have to do is you have to counter back to them. Don Granato did not have answers to what the Sabres did, what the Sabres were facing. When teams found a way to slow down their rush, the Sabres, they didn't know what to do. They had no answers. So that's how you see goal scoring go from the upper 290s to the 240s. That's how you see, and I'll pull up the numbers right here. You can see, just be 1 second. Whenever you want things to pop up, it always takes a little bit longer.
So always happens like that.
Can't find it right now, but the goal scoring went down significantly in the past year. And so a lot of people would say, well, what happened with Lindy Ruff's New Jersey Devils? Their goal scoring went down last year. Well, the underlying analytics said the Devils still were generating a lot of elite opportunities. Despite injuries, despite a lot of issues, their point totals went down because awful goaltending, injuries, and they didn't score as much. But they still showed glimpses of having that ability. When you bring in Lindy and you have guys like Ryan McLeod, basically what they're trying to say right now is we need to bring in guys that are going to help us get the puck out of our zone quicker, make that exit pass, and help us get up ice at a faster tempo. And then we need a mix of guys that are going to be able to get in front of the net, go to the boards, and do the tough plays. I think right now, when you bring in some of these guys, you can start to see these are the counter moves to help enable the Sabres get back to what they were doing 2 years ago. And I know I just rambled on. I went in all different circles right there. I brought up McLeod. I brought up Zucker. But give me your thoughts on that, because I really think what we're going to see is a Sabres team that's going to try to go back to more of what we saw when they had nearly 300 goals in 22-23.
Yeah, it feels like every move that's been made this offseason, I think you've tweeted it yourself, has a little sprinkle of Lindy Ruff, decision-making in that process where they're building a hockey team. They're not building what are the best, individual players we can get on the roster. We look back at like the Casey Middlestat trade, a phenomenal individual skill player, great with the puck, great with movement. But is that what the Sabres want in their third line center moving forward? It doesn't seem like it. Ryan McLeod is, I don't say the complete polar opposite player, Casey Middlestat, but they play two very different games. McLeod is heavily on north-south speed, getting the puck in, using his speed as his advantage. And I think that's going to really help the Sabres score goals when, they're not going to be able to outskill teams every single night. You're going to need to find ways to diversify your scoring. And I think, but you talked about that with Lindy Ruff and the fan thing they had where they want to find guys in front of the net. They want to find ways to score goals that are ugly, because that's how you really score goals consistently in the NHL. Yeah, you're going to have these highlight goals. Tage is going to rip a one-timer through the netting in games, but that's not going to be 82 games a night. They're going to need to find ways to score goals late in games when teams really clamp down. And when they're playing top goalies night in, night out too, because as this team gets better, then they're going to be facing less backups. They're going to be facing the team's number one goalies. You're going to have to find ways to get in front of them, take their eyes away, and find some better goal scoring. And from the fourth line guys being so speed heavy, the Sabres penalty kill should hopefully be better too, and maybe even get some more shorthanded goals off of that as well, using their speed to their advantage. But I think a lot of these moves are just building competition and building, a faster brand of Sabres hockey where your top six, can go out, do some fun things, and also work hard to score some greasy goals. But, it's not relying solely on them for your goal scoring. You're not going to have Kyle Poso dangling at the blue line because the team's building toward, not individual skill anymore, the team hockey. So I think that's going to work really well for this team, especially over the course of an 82-game season.
Yeah, and you don't want to be too cliche heavy, but a hard team to play against. Like, they're definitely a much more difficult team to face going forward than what they were last year. With the speed, it's going to be it puts more pressure on your opponents. And I am encouraged by a lot of what I'm seeing with this team. And it's important to point out that just because you lose goal scoring in Skinner doesn't mean that you necessarily have gotten worse. 2 years ago, when the Sabres scored in the 290s, they were a -4 goal differential. They allowed more goals than they scored. Last year, when they were, I believe, in the high 230s, low 240s, they ended the year +1 or +2 in goal differential. So they had a better goal differential last year, despite scoring 50 less goals around that mark. And to put a comparison, the Sabres of 2 years ago, they scored about 15, 16 more goals than the 05-06 Sabres that had an 110-point season. But they only had 91 points 2 years ago. So it's not just how many pucks you put in the net, it's how many pucks you don't allow in your own net. And I think that's an important aspect to this, because when Skinner was bought out, it made a lot of sense to me from a Lindy Ruff perspective. I didn't care one way or another if he was still part of the team or not. I liked Jeff Skinner, but I kept looking at this team and I'm like, he is not a top six guy on this squad anymore. And if he is, you're putting him with Cousins and Quinn. Is that really what you want to do? You want to put a Cousins who has struggled defensively early in his career with another guy that has been awful defensively. And then you have young Quinn who you want to make that leap, and you're having, like, he has to be the guy that plays defense on that line. Like, there's a lot of things that they have made where they're basically saying, we have identified our top six. These guys are the guys that are going to be carrying our team. Is there room for another move? Yes, but we know who 5 of our top 6 core guys are going to be, and then we're going to let these bottom 6 guys just go to work and do their thing. So with all this being said, and then Steve with another comment, the newly constructed bottom 6 is worth at least 5 more wins. That is on the more optimistic side, but I do think it is going to make quite a difference. And I don't know if there's a way to quantify how much of a change this really will make, because not only do you have the different players, but you also have a different coach. I remember Lindy Ruff when he went to New Jersey the first year, the 1 year there, they had 63 points. The very next year, they had 112 points. So coaching definitely does make a difference. And we have a point projection here. This is from Jay Fresh on Twitter. This was before the Ryan McLeod deal earlier this month. He had the Sabres at 82 points. He said after the trade, he'd probably up that to 84. I still think this is pretty low. I don't know if the bottom 6 will be worth 5 wins. I'm thinking right now around 89 points. I'm thinking if I had a big range, I'm going to say on the low end, 85 points. On the high end, 95 points. If I wanted to narrow it down to 3 or 4 points, I'm thinking this team is 88 to 92 points. So I'm saying if they play up to the level that I believe they can, if they don't suffer injuries to their top 6 that cost them a lot of games, they can be in that playoff mix and they can make it. But if they don't play to their potential, if they don't have bounce back years by Cousins, by Tage, and then that big step forward that many of us expect from Jack Quinn, they could still struggle and be an 85, 86 point team. So I'll ask you, what's your range? And then after we do that, we're gonna ask the big question about, are they going to make it or not? What's your range right now going into the season.
I think that's a fair assessment. And I think one thing we're not talking about a lot at all, which I think really killed the Sabres last season, was their non-existent power play. So I'm really hoping, with Lindy coming in and then Seth Apper coming up from Rochester, that they can really transform that Sabres power play, because the skill is there. The guys are there. They've had success in the past, but for whatever reason, it wasn't clicking last year. So if they can just have a halfway decent power play, that's going to set them apart way more than, in a better fourth line, which the fourth line will help in other ways. But I think a fair range for this team right now, and something, maybe I'm thinking a little too optimistically, but like a 93 points, I think is doable for this roster. And I think we've talked before this, that ceiling could be higher too if, everything works out in the Sabres way, where the top six returns to form, that bottom six is a lockdown. UPL has another incredible year. Your young defensemen take another step up. I don't say the sky's the limit, but if you're looking through with a glass half full mentality, there are some things to be excited for, but just as easy, those things could come crashing down if not done correctly and not done the proper way. So having Lindy Ruffin, who has a ton of NHL experience compared to previous Sabres hirings where they don't, and you're kind of just hoping on vibes and hoping that these young players can just figure it out on their own. I think Lindy's going to make a big impact on that. And I think that point total is, I think, doable. And I think as much as it's a gamble I think is worth taking at this point. And it's going to open yourself up for more success in the future if everything does pay off, which I think we're all hoping it does.
And RJ chimes in, I think better health, a slightly better power play, and Lindy coming back has to be worth at least 10 extra points. That's why I'm thinking playoffs possibly. Like, it's, Washington was a minus 37 goal differential last year. The Islanders were a minus 17 goal differential last year. The Toronto Maple Leafs had the same amount of regulation wins as the Buffalo Sabres. Like, we talk about how last year was just the worst year we've ever seen because we had high expectations for the first time in forever. But then you look at things. They went from a minus 4 goal differential for the Sabres to a positive goal differential. And this is with Tage struggling while hurt. This is with Tuck having a going down, with Skinner going down, Cousins going down,
Quinn's gone,
Quinn not playing. It's like, if they were 84 points last year with all of that being the case, there has to be some going back to the mean a little bit. If the mean is taking a step forward, to me, that's at least 5 points. RJ thinks it's at least 10 points.
Can't get worse.
That's the part that gives me confidence is, I don't know if Tage Thompson's going to score near 50 goals again, but I don't think he needs to score 50 goals. He had 29 goals last year playing with a messed up wrist. So if he's healthy, I think he's I don't know if most Sabres fans realize, Tage Thompson, even with last year, is averaging 38 goals a year the last 3 seasons. So saying he should score 40 isn't really a crazy expectation. That's what a healthy Tage Thompson should be around. Now, the hoping Cousins and Quinn do things, there is some projecting and hoping, but like you said, the power play, the power play was one of the worst in the league last year. If that just gets to average, how many more games do you win in that scenario?
That team might even step into the playoffs. We're right down the wire going into the last week or two where it was a possibility that this team could do it. And they have a couple games where they squeak a couple goals out on the power play.
No expectations this year either. 2 years ago when they were in contention, zero expectations. And we've seen when there's expectations on this team, that's normally when they play some of their worst hockey. Maybe they go back to catching some opponents off guard this year. Maybe they find a way to get some wins. There was a point towards the end of last season where the Sabres went 17, 12-2 in a 31-game stretch where they outscored their opponents by something like 10 goals over a 31-game stretch. So the Sabres have, we've talked about, they have a coach that is a proven winner in this league. They have the talent in their top 6. They have 3 top 5 picks in their defense group, 2 of them number 1 overall. They have a goalie that had one of the best saves above expected numbers last year in UPL. Now, can he continue to play at that level? That is a big question mark. But if he can, if last year was the first step of a productive UPL going forward, there's absolutely every reason to think that this team can be competitive. And then you add in the new bottom six becoming tougher to play against, and hopefully a better coach who is better at getting his team to adapt to what opponents are doing to them and countering those moves. Absolutely possible going forward. And Steve here, 5-on-5 last year was near the top of the league. Any improvement in the power play will just make things more like 2 years ago with the scoring. Yes, and Seth Appert had the power play working in Rochester with Jack Quinn. Quinn really hasn't done great in that area in Buffalo. Can Appert get him to another level? Now, I know there's some Sabres Twitter guys that I respect a lot that have some questions about the Seth Appert power play, and that's fair. But when you have one of the worst in the league last year, you're not really going to get much worse. Any improvement is going to help you out. So let's get to the big question that our show is all about. Gatesy, will the Buffalo Sabres make the playoffs this season?
Based on everything we've talked about, based on the improvements in the power play, based on the top six finding some sort of familiarity again, I say the Buffalo Sabres will make the playoffs next season. And I don't think that's an outlandish thing to say. With an increased power play, UPL doesn't have to be as fantastic as he was last year. It was a young team. Guys should take a step up. As long as the wheels don't completely fall off the bus, injuries completely decapitate this team, I don't see why playoffs isn't a possibility. Granted, last year the playoff threshold was a little bit lower, with other teams kind of stumbling toward the end of the season. But I don't think it should come to that for this team to finally end the drought. I think the talent's there. I think with Ruff as a coach, I have some belief in me. I don't know if it's like the 7-year-old Carson still inside of me looking at the TV, watching the slugs go up and down the ice. But there's something here that, when you look at it from an on-ice perspective, that this is starting to make a little bit more sense. If you look at purely, names coming in versus names coming out, and you're looking at it through like an NHL GM mode perspective, it looks like a downgrade. But I think with Ruff's coaching style, I think with the young roster getting older, getting more experience, I don't see how this isn't in the conversation at all. And I think the Buffalo Sabres have a very good chance of making the playoffs next year. But tell me your thoughts.
Yeah, so first of all, that's bold, that's confident. I love it. I always go through this internal battle where how do I feel emotionally versus what does my head tell me? And then I'm very probability minded. So I'm the type of guy where if you told me you got a 40% chance of making the playoffs, but that's the 8th best odds, well, then you got to say yes, because they got better odds than the teams that are 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13 and so forth. So this is the way I'm looking at it right now before I give my answer, because I want to explain what I'm saying before I say it, because then people are going to just jump on me. Let's assume there's like 5 locks for the playoffs in the Eastern Conference. You have your Boston, Florida, Toronto, Rangers, Carolina. Like those are your 5 locks. And then you feel pretty confident that Tampa Bay is still on the right side of making the playoffs. Who knows? Will they eventually take a drop? Maybe. I feel fairly confident saying that Washington and New York Islanders are not better than the Buffalo Sabres right now. But you have the Devils, who are probably going to take a step back to being pretty good again. So the Sabres, in my mind, they're competing with teams like the Devils, Pittsburgh, Washington, the Islanders, Ottawa, and Detroit. There's 6 teams that are basically competing for 2 spots. Hopefully I didn't miss anybody. Like I said, I don't really like the Islanders much, so I'm throwing them out. I don't really like Washington much. I know people are going to talk about their offseason moves. Those weren't Pierre-Luc Dubois, like whatever. Like that's a move you look at the stats and you're like, oh, he's better than Ryan McLeod. No. So not for what the Sabres are looking for. So I just threw out 2 of the 6 teams that they're competing. So now you have 2 spots for 4 teams. Ottawa? Is Ottawa better than the Sabres? I don't think so. Like, people have been talking up Ottawa for like the last 3 years, and the Sabres finished with a better record than them almost every single year. Yeah. Is the old Sabres goalie going to make a difference for them? Is Linus Ullmark going to be the difference? I don't know. I think Linus Ullmark benefited from playing in Boston.
Agreed.
So I don't think he gets Ottawa over the top. Detroit, like, let's be real. Detroit, they went bonkers last offseason trying to be a playoff team, and they still missed the playoffs. Like, exactly. Detroit is the perfect case of why you shouldn't spend money, because they gave up on their prospects, and they still didn't get any further than what the Sabres did 2 years ago. So I'm not putting Detroit there. Pittsburgh, is Pittsburgh going to make the playoffs? I don't know. Maybe they can compete for a spot, but I don't really think Pittsburgh, where they're at right now, is like, if you compare Pittsburgh to Buffalo, like, they look pretty equal. I really do think I see a case where the Sabres get that 8 spot. You look at the top end talent, and I compare it to Washington. I compare it to all these other teams. The Sabres have the same amount of top end talent, if not more, when you realize they have young guys that have the room to grow. See, and the analytics are going to all say, well, this team played at this level last year. Well, they played like crap last year. They played awful. 2 years ago, they played like this. If they get in that middle ground, I think they get it done. What odds would I put it at? I say it's like a 50-50.
Yeah, I think those odds are pretty fair for this team at 50-50, and that might even be on the lower end just because the teams you rattled off. And I don't know, in my head, like, I hold this team to a pretty high regard in how they should be performing. And I think with the players that are put in, you lose Jeff Skinner, but you also elevate JJ Peterka, who was one of the leading goal scorers last year on that second line, who has always had seem like a different winger playing alongside of him. You throw him next to Tage Thompson, Alex Heck, those three together, those games really complement each other a lot. And I think you're just kind of hoping that second line figures things out, where hopefully it's Benson, because if it's Benson, I think that's a great sign for this organization, because that means he's ready to go at 19. So if he can rise up to that role, I think that would be the best thing for this organization, because then you have that top 6 absolutely cruising. That bottom 6 should be able to lock things down, get a couple here and there, increase power play. Defense should hopefully get a little bit better, a little bit more time to grow, because it's such a young team. And then goaltending too. Like, I don't think it's fair to expect that the same season we got a UPL last year, because that was just out of this world. But the Sabres should be a much better team, especially defensively, where they're not giving up these really high danger chances anymore, where he's not going to have to stand on his head night in, night out, where things should hopefully be a little bit more confident. He's not moving so much side to side. But again, I'm looking through the glass half full, but I genuinely do think this team has the pieces there with the right coaching style under Lindy Ruffer. This is a genuine possibility where it's not just going to be, we need Jack Eichel to score 60 goals this year, and this team's going to find a way to sneak in. They're building a complete roster, and I think that's the right direction right now and going forward.
Yeah, and I'm with you on that. And some people are going to watch this, and they're going to think we're nuts right now. They're going to be like, oh, look at those homers picking the Sabres to make the playoffs after 13 years. They're crazy. You know what? Maybe I am crazy. I don't know. Maybe I am.
They're crazy for supporting this team.
But this is what I would say. When everybody was all high on the Sabres last year about them making the playoffs, you know who didn't pick them to make the playoffs last year? This guy. You know why? Because 2 years ago, I think they outperformed what they really were, and there was metrics that said they were going to regress offensively. Now, last year, I think they underperformed, and there's things that point to a little bit more production out of them. So if you acknowledge that 2 years ago they overperformed and last year they underperformed, you would get to, say, split the difference. You're at 87.5 points, 88 points. So a lot of people would be like, well, Mike, that's still not enough to get into the playoffs. Well, that's where I'm making the difference, being you have a much more experienced coach. You have a much more complete roster, and you have 2 more years of experience for all of your prospects where they have developed and grown. Even if you haven't seen all of the results on the ice, they are getting better during practice, off the ice. And from a coaching aspect, we saw, as I mentioned, a Devils team go from 63 points to 112 in one season under Lindy Ruff. So it is not unreasonable to think that just a coaching aspect could give you a big bounce. We mentioned the penalty kill was one of the worst in the league last year. That bounces back. That could be worth a couple wins. The power play. The power play was one of the worst in the league. But then even the penalty kill, you bring in Ryan McLeod, you bring in Beck Malenstein. Those are fast guys that are good penalty killers. Pressure your opponents, improve your penalty kill at the same time. Make
You
life
don't have your top guys killing penalties either all the time. You're not going to have, and they can come out later in the game and have all that juice too. It's not
make
going to be
life
a
easier on your goalies. And we saw at the beginning of last year, they took a chance on Levi, and he just wasn't ready for that opportunity at that time. Levi showed at the end of the year he's ready for professional hockey. People can say, "Oh, he only had an .899 save percentage in Buffalo." You do a .927 save percentage in the AHL as a 22-year-old. You should compare that to what UPL was doing in the AHL his first 4 or 5 years. Like UPL's numbers versus Devin Levi's numbers in the AHL, they're not even close. And if UPL is this as a 25-year-old, what's Levi going to be like in 3-4 years? So, and you have the insurance. Dahlin scoring 20 goals last year. Like you got offensive talent on your blue line. Bowen Byram could be a 40-point guy for all we know. Owen Power has 40-point potential. And I know offense isn't the only thing that matters. But Samuelson, can he get more games in? Can he stay healthy? Can Power continue to be a shutdown guy? And I know everybody hates on Power because he's tall and he's not physical enough. Lindy Ruff had a perfect rebuttal to that during the Sabres blue and gold fan event. He has longer reach. There's other ways of getting the puck away from forwards. You don't need to just hit a guy. As long as you get the puck off their stick and you're able to get it out of your zone, you're doing your job. And Power does that. So I'll say I'm going to pick them to make the playoffs. How many points would you say right now? Now this is the crazy part. Like we said the ranges. What's going to be your actual prediction for points?
I think anything short of 91 would be a lot. I think 93 is very doable in terms of just things working out in the way that everyone's envisioning right now, where, things kind of return to normal for the scoring in the top six and the power play gets to at least average. You do that, and I think that's beyond doable. You don't even have to factor in, all these guys, all your star players getting a year better, because it's not like a team like Pittsburgh where, each year it's getting tougher and tougher with guys, regressing and getting older. These guys are finally starting to hit their prime, get a couple years of league experience under their belt, and move up the Sabres pecking order where their young guys are taking over this team now. And it's not a huge reliance on, maybe some veterans like a Jeff Skinner or an Alex Tuck to really find the goal scoring, where JJ Peterka is going to hopefully find that first line. You could have a second line of Benson, Cousins, and Quinn. Granted, Cousins has a lot of NHL experience now, but you're still building toward that future at the same time. And I think 93 is very, very possible under the right circumstances.
Hey, great minds think alike. I'm not going to go 93 because you just said it. I was thinking it. I'm going to go 94. And I told you my range earlier was 85 to 95. So I'm going on the optimistic side of my range, Steve. Super optimistic, 100 points. Steve, if the Sabres got 100 points, I'm going to be so ecstatic. It's going to be a party because I got a Sabres half season ticket plan this year. First time I've ever had this many Sabres tickets. I'll tell you this is kind of crazy. I went to 8 Sabres home games last year. They went 7-1. So we're talking about a team that barely finished above 500, but they win when I go.
Might have changed my point totals now.
When I was a kid during the Hasek days, they won the first 7 games I ever went to. So I bring luck to this team. I don't know if they know when I'm there and they just want to play up for me, but I have this sense of confidence in the team. And I guess I'll wrap it up by saying it's not just one single thing that's happened that gives me this feeling of confidence. I had some confidence even when they were struggling last year because I believe in the young talent in this team. And I feel like there was a few things that handicapped them last year, as we've already gone into. But it's also the mathematical side of numbers, things balancing out. You say in a lot of sports, there's things that they go up and down, but there's always that middle ground. I think last year was an anomaly in the wrong direction. So I do think there's a middle ground that will lead to some improvement, whether the penalty, the power play, whether it be their stars performing. So I am optimistic, and with Lindy back, it has to happen eventually. It
It's
has
gotta.
to happen eventually. And there's so many fans that are gonna take the approach, this team sucks. Kevin Adams never does enough, like blah 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 blah. But the fact is, if you just watch this team and you look at the numbers and you see developmental curves, eventually with young teams with high end talent that they surround them with veterans and a good coach, it eventually just happens.
Yeah.
I'm betting that it's going to happen now.
And if it comes to the point too of it's going to have to happen with this core. So if you don't think it's going to like happen now, when is it going to happen? Because this is the time for this core to figure it out, to put the pieces together, to find, long-term success. And if it's not now, why are we still running the same song and dance every year with that same group? At some point, you're going to have to make a drastic change. And I believe in this core. I think we all do, because we've seen so many flashes of it being a really big success. And it comes to the point where, with hopefully under Lindy Ruff, with the additional changes, with guys getting more and more NHL games under their belt, that sustained success can continue and they can get over that hurdle finally. And I think now is the time. And they've gone through a lot of that hardship of falling on their face year in and year out, and coming just short of ending the drought, and having so much attention put on them for things that have happened way before their tenure in Buffalo. And I think at some point that's got to crack through, and I think now is the time for the core.
Yeah, I'm with you on a lot of that, and I'll wrap up my thoughts before we get to our final thoughts. There's a lot of sometimes fallacies, and I'm trying to think of how to word this. A lot of times, the way fans and even reporters think, they can't. This is a tough way to word it, because when you have 13 years of missing the playoffs, it for a lot of people it will justify negativity. Just because the results don't match what you want them to do doesn't mean that the team is making dumb decisions all the time. You could make right decisions and still or make decisions for the right reasons and the right logic and still have it fall flat on your face. And I think what has happened with the Sabres, and a lot of this is like Kevin Adams is just put in a difficult situation. Like, it's hard to make trades when the majority of good players have no trade clauses and they don't want to come to Buffalo. Partially your fault because your team hasn't won, but also partially for things that are out of your control because you took over a team that was really bad, that is in a colder city, that is smaller, that is not a desirable place for most NHL players to live. That's out of your control. When you have to overpay players because New York State taxes are more, that's out of your control. And I think the 13 years has worn on everybody, but there needs to be an understanding that the way Kevin Adams has addressed this rebuild is drastically different than how his predecessors, Botterill and Tim Murray, addressed their rebuilds. Tim Murray was all about instantaneous success after a tank. He sucked for 2 years, got Eichel and Reinhart, and then traded away the farm, trying to win right away, and that team had no depth. Botterill takes over at a stage where they have some of those guys, but they don't really have a farm, but there's the pressure to win now. So he didn't really have the ability to be patient to rebuild that farm, but there's also the pressure to win. So he's trading for guys that aren't necessarily the guys that you need to trade for to help take that next step. And then by the time Adams is here, he's just trying to save it. That's why he brings in Taylor Hall.
Yep.
Eichel, Reinhart, everybody wants out by that point. And yes, maybe he should have bridged Reinhart, but like whatever, it didn't happen. Or signed Reinhart long term, didn't happen. So Adams goes on the full board rebuild 9 years into a drought, like 10 years into a drought. So like people look at him and they're like, God, we suck. Like, and like, we're not doing the moves to win. Well, how many guys have we seen take their game to another level? We've seen Tage elevate. Tuck comes in. He becomes a player. Peterka is a hit so far. Cousins, fans are divided. I think he's a good player. I think Quinn is a good player. Benson makes the team right away. it's tough to tell fans to be patient. And last year, I do think he made a mistake not being aggressive enough. But I think Adams has actually done a lot of things that if we didn't have a 13-year playoff drought, we would say these are smart decisions. These are going to build a sustained, successful team over long haul. But we just the losing for so long is just your cat's having some fun. Your cat wants to know what's going on here, but it makes it hard to look at everything from a rational approach. And the final thing I will say on this thought, a lot of people complain about how Reinhart wasn't signed long term, and how a lot of these guys get away from Buffalo, or how when they finally develop, then we let them go and they win a cup elsewhere. Identifying Dahlin, Power, Tage, Cousins, Samuelson, and so forth, that does show aggressiveness in which you're identifying the guys that you do believe will be great in the future. And just because year 1, year 2, they didn't have the best year doesn't mean that year 3, year 4, year 5, year 6, you're not going to reap the benefits of that. And I do think right now, fans, rather than looking at there's room to grow, they're looking at it as Tim Murray failed, Bilesma failed, Kruger failed, Granato failed, Botterill failed, Housley failed, and they just assume this is going to fail. I'm here to say, I don't think this is going to fail. My question is this year the year they end the drought, or is next year the year they end the drought?
And the thing is, if it's not this year, I'm worried that they're going to make another mistake trying to guarantee it for the following year, when it is something that this core, I believe in it. It's going to have to work. And the only thing in my head that, this team doesn't make it is either a lot of injuries or there's a serious problem with the core in here. And at that point, there's a lot of really difficult conversations I think are going to have to be made. But that's a situation I hope we never have to get to, because we have a lot of hockey before then and a long off season, and who knows what left is still to do. We still got a couple days on arbitration for Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, and that's something here from Steve. It's like, I would love the Sabres to offer sheet, a top 6 forward, because that'd be fun as hell. But you're opening up the door for someone to send a crazy offer sheet towards UPL that you would have to match. And I think that's a dangerous game right now. If UPL is signed at this point, what do we have to lose? But I'm slightly scared of, that opening up a little bit of can of worms, that you're going to have to, sign UPL to a massive deal, because you cannot let him walk next season.
Then Peterka and Quinn in the future, you're going to want to lock them down.
You got
I know that's
$6.5 million on Jeff Skinner in 2 years.
You can keep pushing money down the line, but you also have the Skinner contract that comes into play, even with the cap going up. If Benson continues, I know Benson, that's years away from now, so I'm not even going to talk about Benson. Who cares about that contract at this point?
Conversation.
But there are other contracts to worry about, and you do want to still have room to be able to bring on guys, trade or free agency wise in the future. But okay, we're going to wrap it up right now. Gatesy, both of us picking the Sabres to make the playoffs next year. I'm sure we're going to get some heat from other fan bases that end up watching this on YouTube after the fact. But what are your final thoughts as we wrap up this show?
Yeah, these are these words I do stand by, that I think we both believe in the Sabres core, and we've seen so many flashes, and we see the direction that the actual team is being built now, that there's a team being built for this following season. It's not, here are some really good young players and some guys we can get on a vet minimum to fill out the roster. This is a hockey team that has an identity, that has a coach that knows how to win this league, that knows how to win in Buffalo, and can get people interested in this team again, because the Sabres have no right to deserve any sort of fan interest after the past 13 seasons. Yet there's fans dying for this team they're wanting it so badly. And I think now is the time. And I think it's there. It's just, that gamble that this organization is taking on guys returning to form, I think is a worthy gamble to take at this point in time. And, again, would we have liked the top 6? It wouldn't have hurt, but I do not despise the gamble. And I'm excited to see a Sabres team that is built more than on a couple high-skilled forwards and Dahlin. I'm excited to see a full hockey team that'll play 60 minutes. That's not going to be the worst first-period team in the NHL by a large margin. They're going to be a fun team to watch, and I think we're going to have a real hockey team in Buffalo to be proud of for a change.
Yeah, I second everything you just said. And it definitely is going to be nice not to just be a team based on skill, because say whatever you want about Akposo, Gergensen, some of the other guys at the bottom of the lineup in recent years. Good players. They've had solid careers, lengthy careers. The Sabres needed change. They
Yes.
needed to get rid of the losing culture that was in that room. And you saw what the Bills did, how they got out of their drought back in the day. A lot of it was getting rid of the guys that have just been part of all the losing. And whether or not you're the reason why the losing is happening or not, sometimes you just need to get new faces in the locker room. And
Yep.
when you're replacing the bottom six and you're putting guys like McLeod in there with Zucker, with Abe Cabell, with Malenstein, and so forth. These are guys that are new to Buffalo. They're not coming in expecting to lose. They want to be part of the change. So they already identified their core. Now they fix the guys at the bottom that are going to have a new mindset with a coach that has been here and has won and expects to win in this city. I think it's going to rejuvenate things, and I think slowly fans are going to realize, because I'm telling you this, once it starts clicking with these guys, it's going to be fun. Like I'm not saying 05-06 is going to happen overnight. Like I'm not saying that, but I have gone on the record to say I do think at some point in the next 2 to 3 years, this will be one of the top teams in the NHL. People think I'm crazy. You know what? I have a good history of projecting stuff. I have a very good history, more so in football and college basketball as well. But I'm now going to try to carry that over into the NHL. And I really do see the footprints in place for this team to make the jump. I don't think they're going to do that 63 to 112 that we saw New Jersey do under Ruff a couple seasons ago, but 84 to 94, 84 to 95, 96, 97, maybe they surprise me and they can get even higher. I see the vision. So I'm excited to see it actually play out on the ice, and hopefully we can get some winning hockey to really change the culture, not just on the ice with this team, but off the ice with this fan base. Because even though I understand all the frustration and all the anger and negativity surrounding this team, it's not fun to be that way. And it has gotten very toxic in recent years. And a lot of the fans that do have glass half full personalities like myself, who, even though we're glass full, like we realize when the team sucks, they suck. We just don't need to say it every single post on Twitter. I think we're anxious to get back to talking about hockey, not being afraid of being insulted every time we say something good about the team. And when you look at some of the beat members, the beat reporters, the Matthew Fairburns, even Mike Harrington and Chris Baker from Sabres Prospects, you're starting to see the local guys say stuff like, things are changing in that building. Things are changing with the roster construction. And normally the local guys see it a little bit before the national guys. I can understand the national people being hesitant to talk this team up after they disappointed a bunch of people that picked them to make the playoffs last year. But I see the tides turning, and hopefully we're talking Sabres playoff hockey a year from now, and taking the question a year from now, Gatesy, isn't are they going to make the playoffs? It's are they going to take the next leap to being
How far are they going
one of the top teams in the Eastern Conference? That's what I'm hoping for.
Big question there.
But and I know you said some final thoughts. Anything you want to counter with me before we wrap up?
No, that sounds good. I mean, we talked for like an hour 10, so there's a lot of Sabres hockey here, and there's a lot more to talk about too this offseason. So this won't be the last time you hear from us, and I think there's a lot more we can do and say, and got a lot of offseason left to uncover. 81 days till puck drop.
It's going to be fun. I'm just going to get to these final 3 comments, and then we will say our goodbyes. RJ, every GM wants to play nice, but whatever, use all the offer seats you can. Hey, in a perfect world, that would be the way we do it, RJ, but unfortunately, we just know that's never really going to happen in the NHL. Steve, who's your next captain? I think, Gatesy, you would probably agree with me. It's going to be Rasmus Dahlin, best talent on this team, but also a guy that has been a leader on and off the ice for this squad, well liked by his teammates, has a physical presence on the ice, and also one of the most talented Sabres defensemen I've ever seen.
Yeah,
Duke.
It's tough too. Like, we're not in the locker room. No one can fully say. So I think it's something that whatever decision Ruff makes, I think it's something to go by here.
And then Duke, this team just has too many question marks right now for me to say with any conviction that they're making the playoffs. That's perfectly fair. As me and Gatesy said, even with us picking them to make the playoffs, we're around 50-50. So we're not really saying with conviction. We're more so saying we think we like them more than we like Pittsburgh, Washington, the Devils, and those teams. And then we're going to just wrap up with the final questions. Avoid extra attention on Tage Tuck. Tuck would be an interesting captain. I will agree. I think you would like him too. But Dahlin is probably going to be the guy.
Yeah.
And then appreciate everybody that tuned in. Steve, appreciate the comment right there. Same with RJ. You guys stayed with us for a full hour plus. That means the world to all of us. Duke, appreciate your comments at the end of the show. And then Real Deal Prime, playoffs 100%. And now we have a playoff type roster. Hey, we had some positivity from our commenters on this show. So, guys, we're going to be trying to do a lot more of this going forward. Obviously, it's the summer. We're probably going to be quiet for the next month and a half. But come September, training camp, you're going to see a lot of Gatesy. You're going to see a lot of me. You're going to see the other guys from Two Goalies, One Mic. Trainwreck Sports, we have you covered with Sabres hockey this fall. We're not just going to always be negative. We're going to try to be realistic, have positive and negative takes, whatever fits the team at that moment in time. But highly recommend you guys continuing to check out our coverage. We appreciate everyone that tunes in. You can find Gatesy on Twitter. Tell us your Twitter handle quick.
At Gatesy35. If you have any questions you want myself or Bunt to answer, send them to us there, or at Crossing Swords Pod. We'll do our best to answer them in future things or right there in the moment. But this is an exciting team with a lot of questions, and I think there's a lot of input from a lot of people that we can take into account too.
And then you can find me at Mike_Bunt. And then also make sure to check out my YouTube channel at Bunt Takes. I got you covered for the Bills, the Sabres, UB football, UB basketball, and Canisius basketball, Niagara basketball. I'm credentialed by several different outlets in Buffalo. And let you in on a little breaking news here. I will be covering the Bills training camp practice on July 28th at St. John Fisher. Have access. So Stay tuned for that going forward. So there's going to be a lot of stuff that we have going forward. But final goodbye. Thanks, Gatesy, for joining me. And let's hope the Sabres can finally give us something to cheer about this upcoming season.
Let's go Sabres.